Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Town and Gown. Just as a reminder for those of you who are new to this series, this is an Age Alive programme, a collaboration among several different groups. Age Alive, which is based in the College of Osteopathic Medicine on campus, Primetime Senior Centre, Great Decisions, which is based here at People's Church, and also the Social Science Scholars Programme. Just a couple of quick announcements before we jump into the programme for today. These sessions, they used to be, of course, every Tuesday evening. In the interest of sustainability, we've switched them to every other Tuesday. And we will be sending out a complete list of the upcoming talks very, very soon. But we will not be meeting, obviously, next Tuesday, but nor will we be meeting on the following Tuesday, because, of course, that's election day. And we didn't want to conflict with people's ability to go out and vote. So the session next after this one will be the 22nd of November. And on that day, we're going to have the first of a series, which we hope will go on for some years, of the John Wales lectures. And John Wales, I didn't know, many of those involved in this program did know him. And he was very committed to the community, but also to conservation. And so our speaker will be an expert on conservation in the state of Michigan. So we'll send you more information about that presentation within the next few days. So welcome everybody to another Town and Gown. I'm now going to hand over to Stella Weinberg, who will be moderating this session. And Stella, for those of you who don't know her, is a senior studying both psychology and sociology with a minor in peace studies. So thank you to our speaker, Dr. Eric Montgomery. And now over to you, Stella. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. I appreciate seeing everyone here. I'd like to start by introducing our speaker today, Dr. Eric Montgomery. He's a professor of mine. I have really enjoyed all of his classes I've taken so far. He is an assistant professor with the MSU Department of Anthropology, advisor for peace and justice studies, and part-time faculty member at Wayne State University. His research centers around the anthropology of religion, political economy, and globalization in Western Africa, with a focus on the Iwi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, people of Ghana, Togo, and Benin. Dr. Montgomery will be talking about West African Vodun, a topic on which he has co-directed and produced several films and published multiple books. All right, off to you, Dr. Montgomery.
Thank you so much. Stella's my star pupil, so I appreciate the warm words, and I want to extend some gratitude and thanks to the Age Alive program consortium. Sounds like never underestimate the power of a few like-minded individuals to change the world. The only thing that ever has, Margaret Mead once said, and it's great to see the People's Church and community organizations and senior centers and universities working. This is the way. So yeah, I'll get right into it. A lot of my research is visual, so I might show a few video clips and things like that because it's easier for you to encompass. I'm going to talk mainly about my research in anthropology, religion, and ritual. I actually changed the title of my talk a little bit. So I won't delve too much into political economy. I won't delve into too much of my activism or work at peace and conflict studies at Wayne State, where I've been affiliated for about 25 years, and then the peace and justice program, where I'm the advisor, the minor program, which is growing robustly here at Michigan State. So I want to kind of keep it focused due to time constraints. So I'll focus more on the anthropology of religion and introduce you all to two different religious orders, one called Global Vodun and one called Mama Chamba. My research is in Western Africa, Togo, along the coast. They are Ewe people. Stella, very closely tied to the Ajafon people who are in Benin, who are famous for their large numbers in places like Haiti, where, of course, voodoo is dying and changing. That's a whole nother lecture for another day, but it's certainly a part of the resistance. And a reminder, the only place where Black folks overthrew white people is Haiti, and it was indeed religion and rituals that were played out by leaders of the religious community who helped that happens. So voodoo is not just about divination, spirit possession. It's also about healing. It's also about resistance and sometimes even revolution. And they do great things to tackle the hegemony that is ongoing in places like Ghana and Togo and Benin to this day, especially the women. So I'll commence with a little piece of a clip from one of the films I made about 15 years ago called Chasing the Spirit. And I think it really gives you a nutshell version of what's going on. Let me make sure sound is good and make sure I can get right to that. And if there's any problems, then once this goes full screen, just text something in the chat. So you can see pretty carnivalesque. Voodoo ceremonies have a tendency toward excessive sacred carnival. I'm reading here from my first book. Rules and conventions, power and identities, all sorts of hierarchies are put into question during such rituals. And the taking apart does not always take place along prescribed lines or through rehearsed acts. On the contrary, it's often accidental, by whim, incidental, and by way of individual talent or ineptness, as well as by unconscious social desire. It is these unrehearsed and unpredictable details of carnival that make it carnival, that make carnival desirable and fabulous, and that brings to the eyes of many Goro Vodou people watching it nothing but immense tears. Goro Vodou ritual is a way of shaking up the status quo, placing rifts in structures, and rocking established power boats. So I'll jump right into the talk now. So I'm going to call this Spirits in Motion. I'm going to talk about the crossing currents, not just of Goro Vodou in Vodun in West Africa, West African strains, but also where it proliferates throughout the quote unquote New World, including places like Detroit, Michigan, and Miami, and Brooklyn, New York. And of course, people know about New Orleans, but also the Santeria and the Palo of Cuba, the Obia of Jamaica, the Winti of Suriname and Guyana, the Candomblé, the Macumba of Brazil, anywhere where Black people were brought. These slaves, these spirits have maintained and they continue to adapt. And it's an enormous amount of resiliency in today's modern world. So to give you an idea of just how eclectic and all-encompassing this is, is the dog, can somebody mute the puppy dog maybe? Sorry. So yeah, so give you an idea of how inclusive and eclectic this is. My research can tie to child survival and maternal mortality. It can delve into commerce and money and political economy. It can help shed light on the slave trade, on transgression, on sports, on healing. You saw the spirit possession, you saw the divination, you saw the core centrality of the drum, and these beautiful multi-metered beats sounding all at once. Many would argue the very roots of rock and roll and jazz. Again, another lecture for another day. But the idea with this lecture is to investigate the themes of spirit, slavery, rituals, and memory in the African diaspora through the lenses of Vodun and Orisha in West Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. And Vodun and Vodou, Orisha as it's called among the Yoruba in Nigeria, are hundreds. Some of these spirits are several thousands of years old, dating back way before the time of the Torah or even Hinduism. Of course, these are oral religions, but one could argue these are among some of the oldest gods in the world. In fact, a lot of the archetypes we see in ancient Egypt and in places like Nubia have a lot of the traits of these West African, what are called forest spirits or forest gods. So as I said, the triangular trade and slavery is very important. It's the largest mass migration, forced or unforced, in the history of the world. 12 to 20 million slaves were brought from West Africa. Out of those 12 million, almost 6 million of them ended up in Brazil. So half of all the Brazils brought during the transatlantic slave trade ended up in Brazil. But before the transatlantic slave trade, there was a trans-Saharan slave trade that lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years that involved bringing Black people to places like Iran or Saudi Arabia or Morocco or Tunisia or Algeria. And anywhere where these slaves were brought, the spirits continue to live. Even when the Portuguese brought slaves to southern India and Kerala, they still had these sacred slaves that are known to help women cross the street and come along and help. So one of the books I wrote, Shackled Sentiment, was about how can we revisit and reimagine reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, atonement and memory. And the way the Africans do it is they believe debt stays. And after the trans-Indian and the trans-Saharan and the transatlantic slave trade, domestic slavery in Africa in the late 1800s into the early 20th century actually went up. Now, these slaves were treated very differently than they were under chattel slavery. They came, they were married in, they could possess land. Sometimes the kids of the slave, they're often women who married in. Sometimes the children of the offspring would be more loved than kids from other wives. So they weren't shackled, they weren't doing labor on sugar plantations, cotton plantations, etc. But that being said, these slaves were taken away, these what they call ame fleflowo, which means bought people. They came from places like Mali and northern Togo and northern Benin and Niger and Burkina Faso. And because they died in a different place and never made it home and had their proper customs and ceremonies, they can come back and haunt people to this day. Even Christians, even Muslims get possessed by slave spirits in West Africa, which is what led me to my second book. I found it fascinating. But we can talk about Goro. Goro means kola nut, means Goro and Hausa. There's this idea that a lot of these bought people that later became the Goro Vodou gods and Mama Chamba gods, slave spirit gods, came from the Sahel, came from the northern region. So they use a lot of northern words. The word Goro is a Hausa term. Hausa are the largest ethnic group in all of Africa, over 40 million Hausas. And like I said, because debt stays. So Goro means, the Vodou means spirit, right? Or literally it means breath, like the word spirit in Greece actually means breath as well. but Goro Voodoo, the voodoo of the kola nut. Kola nuts are very, they work on multiple issues like hypertension. You can have no money and eat all day. They're filled with caffeine a lot. You know, that's originally where Coca-Cola came from, the kola nuts. And they're often exchanged ritually, but they work on shingles. They're in all the medicines. They're in all the god objects, the so-called fetishes, les fetiches, that you may have seen in some of the screens as well. So this is about spirit possession, honoring the slaves, honoring the ancestors in the past, and it's also about healing. Goro Voodoo is also what's called an Atike Voodoo cult. And Atike means tree root. So they can do more for sickle cell anemia in my village than they can anywhere here in the West. They can do more for addiction, even hardcore addiction to like methamphetamines and cocaine, but especially alcohol addiction. If people can get through the 6-week program at over a 50% clip, that they stay clean forever. The highest rehab centers in the US, you know, cure heroin and alcohol at about 4 to 6%. They cost thousands of dollars. That being said, in the village, kids still die from basic diarrhea, right? From dehydration. So I'm not trying to say that it's superior to orthodox or allopathic medicine, but what I am trying to say is that there's a lot of science in this. It isn't just ritual and drumming. There's an awful lot of science and an awful lot of healing that goes into this as well. These are my last 2 books. The one on the left, shameless plug, I'm sorry, but if you're more interested in this, talks about voodoo all over the Atlantic world. So we have a beautiful article from Jeffrey Anderson on New Orleans voodoo, and we have several from Haiti, and we have several from Benin and Togo. And I co-edited this book, but some of the top scholars in the whole world that have written on voodoo in Haiti and West Africa are part of it. And that just came out from Indiana University Press this year, a few months ago. And then my other book is the edited volume I did on shackled sentiments. I also have a book that's called An Ethnography of a Voodoo Shrine that just pivots around Togolese and my own research in Africa early on. To give you an idea of the nuance and the complexity of these different gods and these different spirits, whether we're in Western Africa or in the the New World, in the Western world, you can see the names change. Right. So in Benin and Togo, we talk about Vodun or Goro Voodoo, right? Goro Voodoo, I just told you, the voodoo of the kola nut, right? Vodun, spirit, right? In Nigeria, these gods, many of them similar, many of them overlapping. And remember, the Yoruba and the Fon were at war with each other, capturing slaves in what some would call a gun slave cycle in order to maintain power. Of course, Western hegemony and colonialism fueled this, but nonetheless, it's there. So you can see candomblé in Brazil, or obia, as I was referring to, and you can see all these different names. And this is just a simple graph to show people. And it's really paradigmatic, right? Like, so when slaves were brought, because they didn't come to the New World, when they were brought here, and they were often baptized in chains, and when they would see Catholic chromolithographs of, say, St. James the Elder on his white horse with his sword, they said, well, of course, that's the metal god. That's Ogun or Igu or Gu. Or they may have seen St. Patrick chasing the snakes with his scepter out of Ireland. I'm sure you've all seen that chromolithograph. And to African people, that was Boduda, the great serpent in the rainbow, the same snake you've seen in my book. And a lot of people say, well, these black slaves were confused, but they weren't confused. What they were doing is converting the converter. They were able to maintain their African spirituality and religious systems under the guise of Catholicism. And that's why it flourished in places like Haiti and elsewhere. Now it's gone out. People are more open about it. Jay-Z has gone through rituals. Beyonce has been initiated into different voodoo rituals. Of course, you might know Miguel Cabrera. Miguel Cabrera is a babalao from Venezuela, which is this Arusha type stuff. So people are starting to come out a little more because the missionaries were sent to Africa long before the colonials were to pacify it, and this was equated with bloodlust and diabolical, possession, and we all the voodoo tropes. The pins and the needles and the vampires and the werewolves. And I would argue it's the most discriminated, misunderstood religion in the history of the world. It's also should be considered a world religion. If you take together all of these different adherents, all of these different interlocutors from West Africa throughout the Caribbean, you're looking at more than 100 million people. Judaism's at 10 to 20 million. It's a world religion. Sikh, Zoroastrianism, with very low numbers, are considered world religion. But somehow, because these are black and because they're oral and they're spoken, and because of discrimination, and dare I say, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about dismantling white supremacy, are these ideas. And we've seen so many great films done by African and black directors and authors, including many that are out right now, and I encourage you to see them. We really are experiencing an African Renaissance. What dare I say, black and brown Renaissance, a global South Renaissance, where people are really taking forward escapes in the past and trying to understand their ancestral ties. And oftentimes it's white Americans and Europeans who reach out to me and others to get initiated and to go through these rituals. It's a lot of change. So you can see the slave numbers at 5 million there in Brazil. The West Indies took on 4.5 million. You can see the numbers in the US, you know, we're looking at what, 28 to 30 million, 12 to 14% of our population are blacks, African-American African descent in our country today. And think about those numbers, just how many slaves. So when we're talking 12 to 20 million, not to mention the amount that died in the hinterlands coming to the coast, to the slave ports, not to mention the amount that died on the passage over. It really is a colossal number. Today, we have about more than 40 million slaves in the world. So slavery has not ended, right? And of the 40 million slaves in the world today, 27 to 28 million of those are engaged in sex slavery, and half of those are girls under the age of 16. So today, we actually have more girls enslaved doing labor and sex trafficking than we do total number of slaves that were brought from 400 years in Africa. That being said, we're at the lowest percentage of enslaved population that the world has ever seen, because we're almost at 8 billion people. So there's good and bad news regarding that. So to give you an idea of some of these gods that, you know, you can see Kunde. So Kunde is the firstborn god. And it's a really interesting story. The guy who started Goro Voodoo, the big voodoos, these big spirits like Dambala Wedo, the serpent in the rainbow, you know, Maulisa, which is the hermaphrodite voodoo of the sun and the moon, which is the origin myth, the common cosmology of the beginning of the world. These gods are ancient. They're at least, some of them at least 8 to 10,000 years old. We know that from archaeological evidence. But Goro Voodoo really happens at the end of the Atlantic slave trade, and when slavery within Africa, domestic slavery, mostly these women from the north who came to the coast, has an uptick. So they actually took a pre-existing Vodun pantheon, a father god, water spirit, a trickster god, a warrior god, a god of earth or a god of land, right? All of these different gods that existed, and they created this new structure. And each one of these gods were different northern gods that came from places like northern Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, northern Ghana, and they put together a new pantheon that actually fit into a pre-existing pantheon of Vodou. So Vodun, ancient, Goro Vodun, new, Goro Vodun, more medicinal, more of a healing cult, and both of them spirit possession. So all of these spirits, whether Old Vodun, Goro Vodun, Mama Chamba, Mami Wata, which are water spirits, whatever these spirits are, they all demand certain animal offerings and sacrifices. They all also have their own preferred drinks, their own preferred colors, dietary prescriptions. And when people fall into trance, you don't get to pick which spirit you want to possess you. That happens in the sacred forest, in the sacred bush, le forêt sacrée, they say in French, and they call that place Zogbe. And a kid will normally be showing some signs of, sometimes it's some mental issues, sometimes it's a change in behavior. They'll take them to the shrine, they'll squeeze some plant juice in their eye, they'll drum and do rituals, and then the child will open its mouth. It's called an ohunohunotro, which means an opening of the mouth ceremony. And by the song that child sings, they'll know which spirit has chosen to possess it, often for the rest of their life. Sometimes people leave Vodun because of the great demand to give and reciprocate. Jesus always forgives, right? And so you see a lot of growth in evangelical churches and some people flocking to Islam. So Islam and Christianity are growing, but so too is Vodun, just because of the high birth rates. But you don't get to pick which spirit. Once it's determined which spirit has chosen you, sometimes they're in the sacred forest and they never have the opening of the mouth ceremony. Then you can become possessed at different times, especially when your songs and the specific drum rhythms are played, and especially right after the blood is poured on the ground and the animal sacrifices are offered. You've seen some of that in my footage. Right when the blood, the cow blood and the different sacrifices were made, people, and the drum hit, people went into trance immediately, because these ancestral spirits, they demand goat, they demand fowl, they have their favorite foods. They all drink gin, for example, which is colonial. You never take palm wine into the shrine, only gin. So I buy a lot of gin when I'm in Western Africa. And these are just some of the different gods. Sakwata is an earth god. Mami Wata is a water god. She's very interesting because Mami Wata in Nigeria is a light-skinned Black woman with green eyes. And Mami Wata in Brazil is a white woman with dark eyes. And Mami Wata and Mama Isis, of course, coming from Egypt, is a dark-skinned African woman. So it can change, but Mami Wata is the mermaid goddess. She's always tied to wealth. She's often tied to colonialism and capitalism. Of course, when colonial folks sailed, including Columbus, on the front of the boat was a carved mermaid, right? There's this longstanding belief in mermaids. So that's just an example of a few of the gods. My favorite god you see there at the bottom of the screen is called Bangare, and Bangare Kerekechi, and he is the warrior god. And the fetish, the god objects that make up him are more than 100 different plants. There's raven's feathers in there. There's lion's teeth. There's monkey claw. There's mercury. There's cannabis. There's plants taken from a graveyard. There's plants taken from the palm tree, right? All of these different elements. And when I said Atike voodoo, tree root voodoo, that this is a medicine healing cult, that really refers to a black medicine. And in a place devoid of serums and IVs, oftentimes they will put cuts in your body and pack in this black medicine powder, this carbonized. Of course, it has sulfur in it too. They use gunpowder in order to act as a sulfate. And that's how plants and medicines, life-saving medicines, are administered. That's also what happens when you go through initiations. You get cut and the black powder medicine is rubbed into your body, and you eat cola nut, you swallow a cowrie shell, and then you're a part of the Goro Voodoo Vivo, the Goro Voodoo family for a lifetime. And with that comes great responsibility, but also great privilege. I showed you a little bit of the trailer of my film, Chasing the Spirit. If you just look up Goro Voodoo, that word, and Chasing the Spirit on YouTube, you can watch my film. Don't buy it, don't order it. It's on Amazon. You can watch it for free. Michigan State Library also has both of my films and all 3 of my books if you're more interested in any of my research, and you don't have to pay a dime. So the origins of voodoo as we know it lie in Togo and Benin, but voodoo and related strains, like I said, have proliferated with profound impact throughout the world. And I was making the argument that it should be looked at as a world religion. And since Melville Herskovits started doing research in voodoo in the 1930s, anthropologists have really worked hard to legitimize voodoo as a global and dynamic way of seeing, a way of knowing, epistemology, ontology, cosmology, to make it more public and to try to overcome negative stereotypes. That being said, witchcraft, what is called aze or akpaze, or sorcery, which is called beau voodoo, percolates into every fiber. Even Christians and Muslims in Africa believe in witchcraft, and they explain all deaths and all unfortunate events through witchcraft. The strength of Goro Voodoo and these gods, like Kunde, like Bangare, the warrior god I was just talking about, is they're master witch finders. They're really good at catching witches, people who are using sorcery. Oftentimes it starts with jealousy and envy, which we all have, india on the stomach, and then it turns into misfortunes, and people will, the god will possess somebody, and they will say this person has done witchcraft. They'll go to the shrine, they'll do divination, they'll make a decision, and almost every time the person apologizes and says, yes, I was very jealous of her because I haven't been able to have a child, and she's had 5 child. So of course this was envious, and my envy led me to think bad things and to dream bad things about her. So voodoo works not just as healing, not just through the performance, because there's no party like a Goro Voodoo party. These parties go for 3, 5, 7 days, especially the footage you've seen there, which is called a feta trotro, which means a turning of the year ceremony. So all adepts that fall into trance, whether you're male or female, are considered wives of the spirit. If you adhere to the different prescriptions and laws, and you continue to feed via animals and offer gin and cola nuts regularly to the spirits and to the shrine, which are also shared with all the people, it's said that you will benefit greatly. If you do not, or you ignore, or if you do transgressions, the 10 commandments are a very big deal. This voodoo priest that I work with went to Catholic schools. He was on his way to become a Catholic bishop at one point. So he's super well versed in other religions, but this is really about morality. And that's why there's a lot of respect for the Old Testament, not the New Testament, but a God that can sort things out, very, very different things. So to give you an idea of just how exciting this is, these are the youth in Nigeria and African-American youth. You've seen Black Panther, you've seen other films, but a lot of these gods are now gone viral, and people are adapting them and creating new characters, including superheroes and comic books and playwrights and all sorts of things. Like I said, there really is a real renaissance of African Black spirits going on, and the mimesis and the embodiment of those spirits becomes very, very important. As I said, this is science, this is metaphysics. One of the articles in the book Spirit Service is about the physics of Vodun. And you can see, just like you see in Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese traditional medicine, this idea that your body is tied to these different spirits and these different gods, and also sacred numbers. So they do what is called Ifa divination in Nigeria. They call it Fa divination in Benin, and they call it Afa in Ghana and Togo. And what that is it's 16 cowrie shells that determine your destiny. And there's 256 different chapters in your destiny. And if you were to write down all 256 of those chapters, which many people know in their head by heart, it would equal over 100 Qurans and Bibles combined. That's how deep this stuff goes. I've had mine done, my Ifa divination done 5 or 6 times. 4 out of the 5 times that it was done in different countries, they came up with the same Odu, the same chapter. So different foods I should eat, different things I should refrain from, different prayers and different mantras and different poems and different songs and sacred plants and trees that are tied to me totemically and animals that are tied to me totemically, right? So Bangare is Koko Masachi. Koko Masachi means I eat everything and nothing eats me. So guess what is in the mainstay of the actual god object of Bangare, the warrior god? It's raven feathers, because and vultures, because vultures eat everything. And when vultures die, to the greatest knowledge, nothing eats a vulture, right? So I eat nothing and nothing eats me. But you can see the dead ones, the spirit guides, the blood ancestors. This is really epigenetic deep stuff. And the real power of this stuff is that now that we can check stuff with genealogy, the amount of African Americans that I've brought as students that have had divination done in Africa, to find out later that they knew where their ancestors came from through divination long before they sent it into 23andMe, is a testament to just how powerful and how scientific these divination sessions and dealing with these gods, opening your identity and personhood. It's not the mind, body, spirit dualism, this Cartesian thing we get from Descartes in the West of how we construct personhood. Who you are overlaps with ancestors. You have dead ancestors that are a part of your Joto soul, like you're acting like your Uncle Rick, Dr. Montgomery. Well, that's because my Uncle Rick passed away violently before I was born, and maybe a kernel of his personality interjects with mine. So I know I'm talking fast. I know these are big words. I know this is overwhelming for some of you, but this is indicative of just how complex this way of seeing and knowing that we call Vodun. And you can see the Orisha and the Vodun, the different spirits are tied to different body parts, and they'll work those body parts in the shrine, almost like we see with Korean hand or Chinese auricular acupuncture, right? Very similar type of stuff going on. Although no one talks about this because this is Black people, even though it's ancient. On the left, you can see some of the different, what are called vevs. Those are different sacred shrines made out of chalk or corn powder in Haiti. You can see in Africa right there, Islam to the north, including in Togo and Benin, Christianity to the south, and what is considered mostly sub-Saharan Africa. And then you can see folk religions. What you might not notice there, if I zoom in, is tiny little Togo in the West Africa there. I don't think I can zoom it in. You see a lot of pink. So where I do my research in Togo is the only country that has a majority of people following Vodou, indigenous religions, African religions, and not Christianity or Islam. So it's a very exciting place. And a lot of that has to do with the autocratic regime, letting things go, and the churches not being as pervasive in the South, or even the Sunni, and some of, a lot of the Arab and Qatari and Turkey money has flowed into Africa too. Togo's been able to escape a lot of that. And also because of the fact that it heals, right? The atike, the tree root, the healing aspect of Goro Vodou is so good and so powerful that even Christians and Muslims visit the shrine. I have pastors who come and get talisman, magic made to put underneath their church in order to get more people to come to their church. So this idea that you're Christian or Muslim, these labels are really for soup cans. There's this really eclectic whole. There's this multiverse in the African religious imagination. Doesn't make these separations, and these, just like they don't with personality, they also don't with religion as a whole. So a lot of these voodoo spirits have long beards, and a lot of times they'll do the shahada, or the call to prayer, because a lot of these slaves that came from the north were Muslim before. So they have all these Muslim ceremonies, and Muslims will come and watch it with me, and they're like, that's not quite right. They're not saying that quite right. It's really a mimetic nod. It's a romance. Anything that was foreign, anything that was co-opted, especially under the auspices of slavery, needs to be remembered, and it needs to be reinvigorated. So when people go into trance from these northern spirits, or these slave spirits, what are called Chamba spirits, they'll often start speaking a glossolalia of languages that they don't know. Broken Arabic, Hausa, Fulani, Dagari, all of these northern Chamba, Loso, Kabye, all these different northern languages that they don't know. But because their grandmother or their great-grandmother normally was a woman married into the patrilines, it's in your actual blood. So there's a lot we can learn when we talk about taking down Confederate monuments and saying sorry for slavery, and all of these things that Indigenous and Black and brown people are rightly demanding. Africa offers us a roadmap. It offers us a vision with how to do it. And that happens through ritual remembrance that is very deep. This is the inside of the Mami Wata shrine on the left. Mami Wata doesn't take animal sacrifices. That's a vision of Oshun, who is tied to Mami Wata, that a student of mine did in the village, a drawing there on the right. You can see eggs, you can see champagne, you can see candles, you can see white. A lot of those sculptures you see there are for people who have unborn children. They believe if you're unable to have a child and it happens a second time, that it's the same child trying to be born again and again. So infertility and things like that are tied to Mami Wata. And Mami Wata is also a place you go when you want to travel and you want to get a visa to come to the United States or to come to Europe, or if you want to open a business. And there's all these beautiful stories of her abducting men, taking them to her underground lair. And if you adhere and you're loyal to her and you don't sleep with other women for 5 to 7 years, you're said to get very rich. But if you do, then she can come and haunt you and possess you and make you go mad. So Mami Wata is tied to madness, to psychological ailments. Again, plant medicine and spirit possession are not just about performance, they're about healing. You can see the origins on National Geographic, and some other folks have done things. On the right, that's Trinidad and Tobago, which is called Orisha Spiritual Baptist going on. On the left here in the north of South America, Brazil, all the way from Venezuela down here, you have what are called Winti gods. So a lot of the words like loco, which means tree, are the exact same as they are in Togo. And so that all of these different strains cross the Atlantic, and they could kill the body and they could kill the spirit, but they couldn't kill the African religious imagination. Even when you hear old blues songs about selling, Robert Johnson and Jelly Roll Morton and even early ragtime, and these references to selling your soul to the devil or going to the crossroads. The crossroads was not Jesus or the other life. The crossroads was Papa Legba, right? The trickster god at the crossroads. And when you listen to Reagan, you listen to Bob Marley, and he talks about flying away home to Zion. Zion is not Israel. Zion is Africa. And there was a belief that you could fly at night and astral project and go back. So this is they killed the drums in America. So you don't see the voodoo is strong here because they saw what happened in Haiti and they thought that slaves would revolt. The only place that you were allowed to drum in the United States was a place called Congo Square, which today is called Louis Armstrong Park, which is in New Orleans. And isn't it ironic that out of Congo Square, where we see spirit possession, also a lot of Scotch-Irish people and French people with animistic beliefs mixing, that becomes the root for rock and roll music. And as they left New Orleans and hit Memphis and came to Detroit during the Great Migration, we get so much of this Black culture. But the only place they were allowed to drum was in Congo Square, only on Sundays and only once a week, and only into the late 1800s was this allowed to go on. So that's the power of the drum and the power of the spirits. So you can see the Winti spirits in Dutch Guyana, for example, and they're broken across the different main elements of earth, water, forest, right? And earth is also fire, and sky gods, and the same sort of breakdown that we see in Vodou in Western Africa. The village that I do research in is currently about to go underwater because of rising sea levels. And to the north of the village are West African pipelines brought to you by America's ExxonMobil, where they actually stole the land, knocked out all the vegetables. They were growing carrots, hot peppers, all sorts of things, and forced them to give up their land to run this pipeline, this gas pipeline to the port. Overfishing is horrendous. American trawlers, Chinese trawlers, deforestation is a huge issue. I keep telling people in the government, you want to battle China on the front, talk about deforestation, talk about overfishing, and don't stop talking about it till you're blue in the face, because that's what it's about. China can get their minerals on the Belt and Road elsewhere. What they really want is the vote for Taiwan and the United Nations, and that's what they're getting. So everywhere around me is Chinese, Indian, French, Russian-owned businesses, very few owned by Africans themselves, West Africans, and if they are owned by Africans, they tend to be Nigerians, not Togolese. It's the epitome of underdevelopment. 1,600 people in the village, gas pipelines to the north, the sea encroaching to the south. Right next to the Port de Fish, this is a fishing port. These people do very dangerous work, including kids going out miles and miles from the shore at night, jumping in the water in order to scare fish toward the nets. They have to go further and further to get fish because of the overfishing and exploitation. And it's affecting my village in a very real way, because 50 to 75% of all income in the village is tied to fish and fishing. And you'll see that in my film when I talk about it as well. You can see there, that's a Lebanese factory just outside, they just built outside of the village on the left. On the right, that's an Indian pharmacy. So foreign nationals owning up businesses, paying very little taxes, taking land, screwing up access to water, not meeting environmental standards, no worker safety standards, none of that stuff. This is neoliberal capitalism on steroids, and it's absolutely erasing indigenous people all around the world. And I can't imagine where the village would be without Vodun. They've tried to seize the village with deeds, including coming from the president several times, and it was voodoo spirits and the power of those spirits that the people believe has protected them. And there is an enormous amount of fear of this village because the medicine is so strong. So the shrine they will call a trofome. Tro means to turn or to change. You notice when people fell into trance that they start doing this whirling dervish, this circle. Voduns or spirits are also called trone. The shrine becomes a place for ritual activity, both individual and collective. The main gods of Goro Voodoo I don't have time to go into are Kunde, Papa Kunde, and then Ablewa is his wife. And then the firstborn daughter, who's a doctor and a medicine woman, is Sunya Campo. You can see her face there on the shrine. And then there's Bangare. You can see Bangare, the warrior god with his long Muslim beard and his red fez. Remember, a lot of these gods came from the north. They married in through domestic slavery into the village. And there was a north-south exchange of slaves coming south and kola nuts. That's another reason kola nuts are important. And cowrie shells going north for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And here we can see Sakpata, the earth goddess in Brazil on the left. We can see a similar manifestation in Benin in the right. There is Mami Wata tied to Manusa Devi. On the right, there is a Bangare Adap. That is sacred amachi or herb water. They will put their entire kids in that, put that in their nose and ears, and it works to kill infections of all sorts. And there's dozens and dozens of plants that go into that. Sometimes when you go into trance, you decide which plants to harvest or who may need to be administered what. So a few little summary things, and then I'll break away and show you a little clip of some other film footage. But religious values and beliefs, the structure, do not determine them or vice versa. Sacred goods, both material and symbolic, can be understood not just as commodities that are produced, exchanged, and circulated, but also the relation to them. You can do I could do an entire book just on ritual economy, just on following the trajectory of the different things that go into the gods and the spirits, the different offerings, where they come from and how they're obtained through redistribution and through reciprocity and gift giving. So I don't have a lot of time. There's some kola nuts on the right. On the left, there's some pictures of slaves that came from the north and from many Ave slaves as well, ended up in places like Haiti, like I alluded to earlier. There is my first book. There's some more of the Orishas and voodoo gods on the right. That is Bangare. You can see the bell because he's good at catching witches. You can see those feathers. Those are raven's feathers. You can see that black powder. You can see the kola nuts and cowrie shells ingrained into those different objects. Those are the god objects, what are called the fetishes right there. That's an example of one. That is Bangare, the warrior pantheon. So policemen, military people, you can see those knives going through one of them. Anyone who dies a violent death, which is considered a vumeku, will visit Bangare. Everyone wants to die peacefully in their sleep. They call that an afemeku, just to die naturally. But when you die by gunshot or by factory accident, or more and more what is common on your moped or in your car on the roads, it's believed that those are vumeku, that those are violent deaths. So they need entirely different rituals because they believe it can continue to exist and haunt different families. So the stuff gets pretty encoded. Here's Kunde, the first spirit on the left. You can see there's 3 different fetishes, 3 different god objects there. There are Catholic rosaries in that shrine behind there. They will often refer to him as Jesus because he died a violent death like Jesus, and the 3 representing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So there is some syncretism, some mixing of Islamic liturgical elements and especially Christian Catholic liturgical elements into the Goro Voodoo, because Goro Voodoo is modern and it mixes a lot of these different religions. Here you can see somebody falling into trance, going to the shrine there at Sakpata, upset that a proper sacrifice was not made for the family and while in trance, and then we had to do that. I can show you more footage. Sacred songs, the sacred chalk you see on faces, the jinn, the blood, all of these different gifts are meant to be reciprocated to the gods. Those are chamba. Those are slave shackles, bracelets that sell as jewelry. The different colors in there are indicative of the different phenotypes of where Black people from the north came from. Unless you're African or African American, or unless you spend a lot of time with people of color, we don't tend to see the diversity in colors. The more time you do that, you'll recognize recognize that some Africans have more red in there, more hemoglobin, or that some have a yellow tint. So these slaves from the north that have different colors are honored in these Chamba ceremonies. So the Mama Chamba is the pantheon of slave spirits, just slave spirits, mostly coming from the north. And I've written extensively about that as well in a few more photos, and I'll end it there. How are we with time? 5:50. I want to leave some time for talking, so I will not show a video.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much for your presentation, Dr. Montgomery. I'd like to open up the scene for questions now. You can either pose them by raising your hand or putting them in the chat. Yeah, David.
This interests me because I was in a program, Operation Crossroads Africa in Gambia in 1962, and I've just been trying to put together a Zoom conference of the 13 of us. And two of the people I remember at the end of that summer were very interested in Juju and had gotten in touch with Juju. And now I've gotten in touch with the two, Art Solomon and Bill Roberts. And one of them had become a Protestant minister, a Methodist minister for 20 years, and then has left the church and has done some studying, I think, in Togo. And I don't know too much about it, but the thing that attracted them and that at the end of that summer was the ability of the Juju man, as they called him, to be able to know facts about their life and make predictions about their lives. And I was just wondering how that fits in. And
it's a great question, and what a time to be in the Gambia in 1962. So
Yeah.
you may remember Jammeh, the president that before of the Gambia. He's traveled to Benin and actually purchased fetishes from voodoo priests. So even these good Muslims and leaders of state are behind the scenes of procuring this stuff for protection, for safety, for power. No doubt about it. That's a common theme in Africa and in the New World that a lot of people don't talk about. It's very secret, but that type of stuff goes on. The Gambia, with the onslaught of Islam and from the north, and especially with a lot of the more existential Islamic, right? It's not, now you have a lot of Sunni money and stuff that's pumping in because there's resources and things there. But in the past, these were really inclusive Sufi movements of sorts that happened in Gambia. So it's just an interesting crossroads with the Wola and Senegalese. But yes, I get people from Gambia who've been to my village. The guy who I work with in the village is the head of Goro Voodoo for all of West Africa in the region. And my house is, I'm very lucky. I was Stella's age when I was at that other school down south, U of M, and when I went to Africa. And I've met some Gambians there for different ritual purchases to do things, often very wealthy Gambians, and often sometimes Protestant mission churches. People come there in order to get more people to go to their church or to get more power or more charisma. So yes, Togo has this mystique. I wouldn't be surprised if they was there. I have not been to the Gambia. It's a beautiful place. I'd like to go upriver. I have been to Senegal. I have studied some of the Sufi movements and things there and some of the healing, but I don't know a lot about it. But what a time in the 60s. What an untouched, unspoiled, beautiful place the Gambia must have been in the 1960s. I mean, you got lions and hippos and things there that are with mass extinction that are disappearing. But that little country and Bangui and Banjul is a fascinating place. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, the question about what really struck them was the ability of the Juju man, Gomez, I think that was his name, to be able to know facts about their life, the divination. And is that an ability, or is it like, we hear the con man here, making.
Okay, so two things. So Juju is a term is a derogatory term, right? And it's really referring to curses and magic and witchcraft, Juju man, and there's different names from it, right? Just like the word fetish, right? From fetico in Latin is a derogatory name. That being said, they use the word themselves. The Africans and the Gambians talk about Juju themselves. Like I said, witchcraft is an explanation for everything. Sorcery you can learn. You can learn how to fly at night. You can learn how to invade people in their dreams. You can learn how to psychologically get people to buy your products or to get them to bend to your will. That's sorcery. Witchcraft you're born with, and it tends to run in certain family lines. And a lot of people have written about witchcraft as it's a way for disempowered, marginalized, mostly women, to invoke power in spheres that they otherwise would not be able to get. The ability for them to predict the future or to know your past comes through the scientific aspects, right? And, you know, all around the world, some places they break cords and ropes or plant fibers and do divinations, right? Some places they read the entrails of animals, like in South Africa or in like Vietnam or in Tungus, where we have shamans in ancient Siberia, all around the world. But the idea and the belief is that if you're born with these gifts, whether they be witchcraft or the power to be a diviner, and you go through the certain rituals, that the gods prefer certain people, that they prefer certain people's voices, they prefer certain people's demeanors. And just like a priest may be a conduit, that the idea you go to, why do you go to the father or why do you go to the priest? Because there's some idea that he, she, or they is somehow closer to God. And that by that priest praying for you, it's a powerful thing. It gives you great amount of hope. So that exists in Africa as well. Juju is an explanation for all deaths, even people who die, like I said, afemeku, in their own sleep peacefully. There's still going to be some juju. There still is some sorting out that goes on. Africa, I've met 5 atheists the whole time I've been in Africa, over 7 to 8 years. It is a different place. And these gaps between Islam and Christianity and what is witchcraft and what is sorcery, in French they say sorcellerie, these labels are really for soup cans. It doesn't fit into the way the African imagination and the African mind processes things, which everything is connected all the time. We've been here before, we'll be here again. They talk about maso maso. Maso maso means chaos. The beginning of the world was formed by things flying into each other and bombardment. And they'll always say the sun doesn't set. It's just the world spinning around. And there's certain people who are marked by God that have these gifts. Oftentimes, these are people who might be marginalized here with maybe they're autistic, or maybe they have trisomy 21. Those people are often some of the strongest medicine people and have some of the most important responsibilities maintaining the shrine. So what we consider as excluded here, or somebody that might be born with a defect or a deformation, normally in voodoo circles, it's believed that they're marked by God, and they will include these people. You want to talk about diversity and inclusion. What a joke. We talk so much about it, but these African systems, the village system, and where who you are overlaps with ancestors and with trees, and also, you know, your brothers and sisters in really real ways, then it's different. And juju normally works close by, right? Who's jealous of you? You're jealous of your own sisters. Parents are often jealous of their own children. And that's where the witchcraft and the juju needs to be sorted out. And once the diviner can decide who has these ill intentions, this malcontent on their stomach, and you get them to admit that they have this jealousy, then you get conflict resolution, then you get mediation, then issues get resolved and you move on to the next thing. So juju is a part of everyday life. Certain people are born with these abilities. Certain people can learn these abilities as well. And the strongest diviners, if they're not accurate and they're not helping you, people will cease to go. And a lot of shrines die because of that, or they become so big on their dad's name or something like that, or something that happened that they'll continue, or they'll become misers and they'll want your money. Like churches and mosques do that sometimes too, right? But the real wholesome, good people that really know how to predict things about your life. And every single person I've ever taken to Africa, every one of them, skeptics. I got old Jewish professor friends of mine in their 70s and 80s, man, who have gone to Africa and had divination, and it's absolutely blown their mind, changed their whole way of seeing. So I don't want to convert people. I don't want to like say, oh yeah, this is true. But yes, where I do my research, these diviners, these bokono sophos, these juju men, as you say, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're marriage counselors, they're dietitians. All of these different things that we go to, they can do it all. And the more eclectic and the more holistic they are, the longer they stick around, and the better they tend to get. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Well, it keeps going on. I ask, well, where is that because they're good psychologists, or
part of it is
review in a sentence of the nature of the world, and then I'll shut up.
No, absolutely. The nonverbals, which we know is about 90% of our communication, the really good priests and medicine men are really good listeners. But you get trained. Like, you don't just know those plants because somebody goes into trance and you try this plant and all of a sudden, and a lot of them are psychedelics, and, there's been a lot of research and a lot of trial and error in things like dosage and things like adherence to different regimens and things like that. It's been worked out over time. But yes, the ability to read people and the ability to say things in ways that are, it's just the same thing that some psychics do here, yes. And a lot of these people, some of these people are mad. A lot of the best healers are schizophrenic, for example. They can be total megalomaniacs, total narcissists. A lot of them in Cuba that I've met they're straight alcoholics and sometimes drug addicts. And they're really good at healing and they're really good at reading. So it just depends. So yes, some are born with it. Yes, you can learn more. Yes, it's an explanation. Witchcraft is an explanation for all misfortune all throughout West Black Africa and the New World.
All right, Judith, it looked like you had a question.
You have to unmute, Judith.
Looks like you're still muted.
God, I hate these things. Okay. I'm curious about the separation of living and dead. You haven't mentioned anything like that. And I know that in Haiti and a few other places that they believe or use zombieism or something. And I thought maybe you could clarify that for me. How
Sure.
does that fit in? That's question number one. Question number two is, are these countries able to be penetrated by organized Western religion now?
Okay, your
Because
first.
I'm thinking, here's what I'm thinking. I was in Guatemala back in the 60s, and we were up in Chichicastenango, a mountain village, and we saw a ceremony take place during Mass, which is a rather formal, prescribed thing, and they were killing chickens on the altar.
Yeah, well, think about Yom Kippur. I don't know how much you know about it, but there's a lot more. If you read that old Bible, they were sacrificing animals everywhere, especially when you read the
I
Old
know.
Testament. So
Yeah,
your
but-
first question on zombies. If you want to know more about that, Wade Davis, the Harvard plant botanist, ethnobotanist, has written and figured out what's going on with zombies. Yes, there's frogs in there, and yes, there's all these different plants. It's the dioxin from the pufferfish that blow up that they're putting. What happens is normally they will, and zombification is pretty rare, but they have this technology, this pufferfish in Africa. They know about it throughout all of Africa. Normally it's somebody who's transgressed, been raping women, stealing, drinking, or whatever. And what they'll do is they will dose them with some plants and they will slow their heart rate down. And when they slow their heart rate down, they will give them this dioxin, this mixture of this pufferfish. What happens is it lowers your heart rate so much that you won't detect a heart rate, right? And oftentimes they'll bury them or keep them separate, or where they're not getting enough oxygen to their brain. And then we know that what's happened with this dioxin with that is that they've invoked mental retardation, essentially, right? And then what they'll do with those zombies is they'll normally put them to work on the plantation doing labor. They tend to be big, strong guys. So yes, all the rumors of zombies and stuff, it's not very pervasive. It's pretty rare. There's probably, to the best of my knowledge, there might be 5 to 10 zombies in Haiti today. There might be 0 with the way the evangelical church is taken on, because the medicine to get the pufferfish and mixing it with the plant is a teeny bit complicated. So that's an answer to your first question. Your second question about, when you were talking about Guatemala and the mixing of religion, right? And the syncrasies and all of this, all of religion is syncretic, first of all. So the idea that Africans are confused, that they see these chromolithographs of St. James and they confuse it with Ogun, is a misnomer. People are trying to maintain their power. So all of syncretism just comes from the Greek word syncrasi. It means mélanger. It means to mix. All of religion has always been syncretic. Judaism, Christianity, all these different offshoots. I mean, look at the Pentecostal and the spiritual Baptist, right? So that's one thing. What's happened with Black and Latin people, because they've been marginalized and because they've been oppressed, is they've had to come up with really creative ways in order to maintain their ancestral traditions under the guises of being good Catholics or good Christians. It's really that simple. And there is a ton on that, including I've written a couple of articles, one for the Journal of Religion and Society about syncretism, and that's free. And if you email me, or Stella shares my email, and you want me to share that with you, I could talk more about that as well. Interestingly, in Guatemala with liberation theology and in South America as a whole, we've seen a lot of changes with it. You know, indigenous religions and elements have not survived in the Americas the way they have in Togo with voodoo, and even in voodoo and even in Guatemala, what does survive is got to be ensconced in secrecy. There's you were lucky to see that in the 60s. A lot of this stuff has to be done with secrecy because NGOs and governments and everyone else cut off funding, and they stereotype you that you're doing this juju, you know. But the idea of animal sacrifices and bloods is pervasive throughout all religion, even Hinduism forever. And Hinduism, you know, most Hindu and Brahmins today aren't even eating any meat. But when you read the Rig Veda and you read the Ramayana, you see that this is a part. It's about the ancestors. If your ancestors want alcohol and want food, who doesn't want steak and beer when you're dead, right? Your other first part of your question about the death and when I answered Haiti, the veil between this world and the other world are very thin, and they can play with it. When you are dead, you are gone. But there's certain elements that come back, and certain parts of your personality that jump back into the unborn. And it isn't you, you're dead and you're gone. And how you died, like I said, whether it's peaceful or violent, determines your funerary environments. But yes, the veil between this world and the other world is thin. That time is no thinner than now. It's October, it's Samhain, it's Halloween time, right? And even in Africa, this is a time where people all around the world harvest. And in a time when they get down, and when you harvest and you get down and you have all this bounty, boy, people get jealous and people want to come from it. It creates friction, and even people who you've done in the other world, right? And the idea is that the dead can still see a lot of things, and a lot of rituals need to be done for those spirits to go on and for them to be appeased. And so, yeah, it's not like here. I mean, they have full-blown conversations, even Christians that I know, even Africans that I know at Michigan State University who have lost their mom and dad, who are strict Christians. I'm talking really understand the Bible, and you know, not just talkative stuff. These folks talk out loud to their ancestors when they pray and talk to them, even though they're not voodoo people. So that veil between this world and the other world, the living and the dead, black and white, left and right, it's all liminal, Judith. It's all liminality. We are between and betwixt. And what helps sort out that between and betwixtness is adherence to these gods and these spirits, because they've been here before and they'll be here again.
Dr. Waller, were there any questions in the room there?
Yep. So I jump in with a question. Eric, that was absolutely captivating. I can see why Stella loved your class so much. I had vague recollections a few years ago reading a sociologist's account of voodoo in Haiti. And this scholar made the argument that it served as an important pressure release, so that those who were habitually low status could, I think, be ridden, I think was a language, be ridden by
the horse, yes.
The horse, that's right, to be ridden by a high status spirit. And so that although when they left the trance state, they had resumed their inferior social status, they had the relief and the release of that period of feeling high status. Is that a good of what's going on?
I think so. And here's why, John. 85% of people going into trance in my village are females. When I was in Haiti, it was about 70%. Why women? Well, women are more marginalized. They're more disempowered. When your body is just the horse, right? And your head, la tête, right? Sur la tête, in the voodoo in Haiti, it's this idea that, you know, Maya Dare and so many people have written about it. You're just the horse, and the rider, the jockey, is the spirit, and they're in control, right? And when you're in trance, you have more power than every priest, even the most powerful head of Goro Voodoo, who you saw in my film footage, the old guy walking with the limp. When they're in trance, they're not themselves anymore. They're gods. And they can say while they're in trance, you were sleeping with her, or you put your hands on the kid, or you've been using your power. So a lot of priests get really nervous when they go to these ceremonies, especially if they're using their power and doing bad shit, because God sees everything, right? God sees everything, and these spirits see everything. So yes, there is no doubt the literature is filled with Haiti throughout the world, that people more likely to fall into trance, that it's a way for them to invoke power that they might not otherwise have, to move them from the realm of the powerless to that of the powerful. And it's also a very good feeling, right? It's taboo to talk about trance after it, you know, and I've been under a few times myself, some of them semi-conscious where I remember some pieces of it, and 2 events where I don't remember anything at all. I woke up in the bosom of a woman crying I went through my whole slavery history of my family, the Montgomery clan on my dad's side, Irish Scots, who owned slaves, right? They told me all of this stuff before I, did any of the genealogy. But yes, it's a great question, Dr. Waller and Erica Bergignon. And the best thing on spirit possession is by I.M. Lewis. And one of his 4 main points is that, yep, those who are chosen to go into trance, it's a way for them to invoke power. And they do have enormous power. And people get really scared when they go into trance too, right? Because, they'll knock you down. Sometimes it takes 10 or 12 people, especially these slave spirits, to control one small woman. They're supercharged, because it's not them. They're being ridden by these slave spirits from the north, these wild spirits from the north. And they want nothing more than to dance. And so when they go into trance, they go up to the drummers, and there'll be different spirits, and they're all screaming at the drummers to play my song, because the different gods want to hear their own songs. So then you get this cacophony, and these drum lines are so complicated where they're actually speaking back and forth. And what it is the spirits. And it'll look like the drums have strings on the feet of the people. That's how in time they are. It's absolutely magical. But yes, and I've met some women, including some Haitian women, who could go into trance that are married to 6 or 7 spirits. Normally it's 1. Sometimes in different pantheons, it might be 2 or 3, but I've met a few Haitians that can go into trance for 6 or 7 women. And these women are powerhouses, what they call mama benzes. I mean, they have an enormous presence, an enormous amount of charisma. They tend to be really successful in business too. And they attribute it, but it's very difficult, because if you go into trance with 6 gods, now you got to buy chickens and goats and palm wine and gin and all of that for all of these gods, right? So it's a really weird system. And a lot of people leave voodoo because of that, because the demand to share. Right? It's not about capital accumulation. He or she who dies with the most wins. We honor Elon Musk. It's like he's a god. In Africa, there's nothing worse than somebody who has a lot that doesn't give. It's not how much you accumulate. It's how much do you give away. That's what potlatches are about with Native Americans. That's what it's about. So there's a real anti-capitalistic ethic there anyway. Women are marginalized everywhere around the world. People who have different disabilities, I told you, have a higher, are more likely to go into trance. So it's a way of about evening out power, absolutely. And so is witchcraft, by the way, to answer David. And so are witchcraft accusations or juju accusations. It's all about power and ironing out power.
Do you have any other questions?
Well, I want to thank you. This is really wonderful. I do this at Wayne State with the SOAR group, which is the Society of Active Retirees. Keep growing this. Keep doing it. Keep making it intergenerational. Stella, when you're done and you graduate, pass this baton on. This is the key. We talk so much about race and class and gender, and we don't talk enough about economic justice, in my opinion, and we don't talk enough about intergenerational justice. My students you don't, Stella, but they call me a boomer. I'm in my 40s, and it's so important. And if there's one lesson from Africa and from Vodun, it's that the beard doesn't tell stories to the eyebrows, right? This gray beard of mine came in, when I was in my teens, I started to grow, but I was born with these eyebrows. And that's the way I look at old folks and a lot of you retirees. And it's incumbent upon the youth to reach out and to create these bonds. So, because this is how we got a big midterm election coming up. This intergenerational stuff is crucial. It's crucial. To me, it's as important as anything, as important as race, gender, or anything else. In good societies like in Africa that maintain their culture, they do this. And it's not like there's somebody born here and you die here in a line. That's why grandpas are so close and grandmas are so close to the newborn, because it's a circle, and there's a lot we can learn from Africa. And I think we've lost that. I don't think we take care of old folks in this country, and I don't think we take care of children and kids. So if university kids and old folks can be united, we can do great things.
Very good. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today, Dr.
Stella, you can share my email if anyone wants to reach out. Elliot already reached out to me. He's been sending me some Elliot, give me some time to catch up with this revise and resubmit, and I'll respond to you this weekend. But he's doing folklore stuff and a lot of the stuff about the Ojibwe and stuff and the Anishinaabe. I can't wait to. I hope we'll be corresponding for a while. I look forward to getting to know you better, brother.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for taking the time and your attention for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Stella. Peace, you all.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.